The house in Yucca Valley held silence the way a grave holds secrets. Catherine Bridger woke at 05:30, same as she had every morning for 52 years. Military discipline never left. Neither did the loneliness. She swung her legs off the mattress, felt the familiar rebellion in her knees where old parachute landings had left permanent damage. The sharp reminder in her lower back where a piece of Iraqi shrapnel still lived too deep for surgeons to risk removing. 76 years old. The bathroom mirrors showed her the truth without mercy. Face weathered like desert hardpan. Eyes still sharp as targeting reticles. Hair gone silver white, cut military short because old habits die harder than old soldiers. In the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgled its morning ritual. Through the window over the sink, dawn painted the Mojave in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful, vast, empty. She'd lived in this house for 6 years now since Thomas died. Heart attack at 73 while watching a Dodgers game. One minute he was cursing at the television about a blown call, the next he was gone. The paramedics said it was quick. They said it like that made the silence afterward any less deafening. Her sons called on Sundays. Marcus from Boston, where he practiced corporate law. Ryan from Charlotte, where he ran a construction business. Good men, both married with children of their own. Lives that moved forward with purpose while hers stood still in this desert. They asked if she was okay. She told them yes. Some weeks she even believed it. Kit poured her coffee, black no sugar, and carried it to the porch. The October air held a chill that would burn away by noon. She lowered herself into the wooden rocking chair Thomas had built their first year here, the one that creaked under her weight like old bones settling. The Joshua trees stood sentinel against the rising sun, twisted and ancient and utterly indifferent to human loneliness. This was her routine now. Coffee, silence, memories that arrived uninvited but stayed as long as they wanted. Some mornings the memories were kind. Thomas's laugh rough as sandpaper but warm. Her boys as children playing in the yards of whatever base housing the Corps had assigned them. The pride burning in their young faces the day she pinned on Master Gunnery Sergeant, the first woman in her division to make the rank. Other mornings the memories cut deep. Beirut, the Gulf, faces of Marines she'd trained who shipped home in flag-draped boxes. The shots she missed at 1,100 yards in the desert. The helicopter pilot whose name she still whispered in the dark. Captain Richard Morrison. Dead because her calculations were 6 inches off. She drained her coffee, rinsed the cup in the sink, looked at the calendar magnetized to the refrigerator door. October 14th, 2024. No appointments, no obligations. Another day of being invisible, of existing in the margins of a world that had moved on without her. Then she felt it, a tightness in her chest. Not pain exactly, pressure. The kind that came before missions, before moments that rewired your life, whether you were ready or not. Kit looked at her hands. They trembled. Just slightly, but enough to notice. The arthritis was getting worse. Her doctor, a young woman who looked barely old enough to drive, had explained it with charts and medical terminology. Early-stage Parkinson's disease with arthritic complications. Progressive. Manageable with medication for now, but eventually the tremor will worsen. You'll lose fine motor control. Eventually, that word hung over everything now like a sentence waiting to be carried out. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her angry. Angry at time, angry at biology, angry at the idea of fading away in this silent house, while her hands forgot how to hold a rifle, her one remaining skill rendered useless by neurons misfiring. She walked to the garage, yanked the dust cover off her pickup truck with more force than necessary, and made a decision. 29 Palms Marine Corps Base sat 40 minutes east through desert that never changed. Sand and stone and sky that stretched to infinity. She hadn't been to the base in 3 years. Hadn't wanted to see how many new faces filled the spaces where familiar ones used to stand. Hadn't wanted to be the old woman everyone smiled at politely before forgetting. But today, the loneliness felt like a physical weight crushing her chest. Today, she needed to hear rifle fire, needed to smell cordite and hops gun oil, needed to remember who she used to be before retirement turned her invisible. The drive took her past the same landmarks she'd memorized over decades. The rock formation that looked like a crouching giant, the abandoned gas station with its rusted pumps, the highway sign for 29 Palms that someone had spray painted to read 29 Palms, where young Marines go to question their life choices. She kept the windows down despite the morning chill. Let the wind tear through the cab and make her eyes water. Her truck was a 2015 Ford F-150, dark blue, nothing fancy. It ran. That was all that mattered. Like her. Still running, still functional. For now. The main gate at 29 Palms looked different. New construction, newer guards, A lance corporal, who couldn't have been more than 20, checked her retired military ID with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd processed 10,000 IDs and would process 10,000 more. "Ma'am, you know where you're headed. Just the public observation areas near the ranges," Kit said. He waved her through without making eye contact. She was furniture, scenery, an old woman who probably got lost on her way to the commissary. She parked her truck near the Scout Sniper Range complex. This was a restricted facility where the Corps trained its precision marksmen, surrounded by security fencing and warning signs that promised prosecution for unauthorized entry. But Kit knew the terrain. She'd helped survey this range back in 1998 when they were planning the expansion. She knew exactly where the topography and fence gaps allowed observation from outside the wire. She grabbed her binoculars from the glove box. Like a 10x42M, the same ones she'd carried through Iraq and Afghanistan. Government issue from a lifetime ago. She walked the maintenance access road, her knees protesting each step with sharp reminders that 76-year-old joints weren't designed for fieldwork anymore. But her eyes were still sharp, her mind still tactical. At the vantage point, she remembered she raised the binoculars. The 2,000-yard range spread out below her position. She could see it all. 4 Marines at the firing point, 2 instructors hovering behind them, 1 senior officer observing from the shade of a tactical vehicle, and a problem so obvious it made her jaw tighten. The team was failing. Through the Leica, she watched the pattern repeat. The shooter would settle into position. The spotter would give a wind call. The shooter would make his corrections. Fire. Everyone would glass the target through spotting scopes. Heads would shake with disappointment. They'd reset and try again. Kit started counting. She was good at counting. 43 years behind a scope taught you patience for details. Shot 12. Miss. Shot 15. Miss. Shot 20. Miss. Shot 23. Miss. An hour passed. The misses continued. Kit lowered her binoculars and studied the environment with the practiced eye of someone who'd made wind reading into an art form. The wind at the firing point was coming from the southwest at 12 to 15 miles per hour. Steady, but not calm. At 2,000 yards, this was manageable. Not easy, but far from impossible if you knew what you were doing. But that was the problem. They didn't know what they were doing. Kit scanned the terrain between the firing point and the target with systematic precision. At 800 yards, a cluster of creosote bushes moved differently than the vegetation near the shooters. The wind there was stronger, maybe 18 to 20 miles per hour, and the angle had shifted, more southerly. At 1,200 yards, dust devils spun across open ground, showing turbulent conditions. At the target itself, the orange wind flag hung nearly limp. Western exposure, maybe 8 miles per hour. 3 distinct wind layers, maybe 4. The shooter was compensating for what he could feel at his position, but his bullet wasn't spending much time at his position. The projectile would be in flight for almost 4 seconds. 4 seconds of traveling through different wind conditions, each one pushing the bullet in different directions with different force. The spotter was reading mirage. Kit could see him glassing, giving calls based on the heat shimmer at the firing point. But mirage only told you about the wind where you were not where the bullet was going. At extreme range, that distinction meant the difference between center mass and clean miss. Professional curiosity overrode her usual caution about trespassing on restricted ground. Kit started walking closer to the firing line. Each step sent lightning bolts of arthritis pain through her knees. Old jump injuries from Fort Benning in 1972, aggravated by a hard landing in Panama in 1989, further complicated by age and deteriorating cartilage. The kind of pain that had become such a constant companion, she barely noticed it anymore, except when it spiked. She was within 100 yards of the firing line when a Marine corporal spotted her. Ma'am, you can't be here." He jogged toward her, young and fit and professionally concerned. "This is a restricted training area." Kit stopped, raised her hand slightly in a non-threatening gesture, offered an apologetic smile. "I understand, Corporal. I was watching from the ridge and got curious. I'll head back." But she didn't head back. Not immediately. Because she'd seen something that violated every principle she'd spent 4 decades mastering. The spotter was giving wind calls based solely on the mirage at the firing point. He was reading it correctly, Kit would grant him that. But he was ignoring the vegetation at mid-range, ignoring the dust patterns, ignoring the flag at the target. He was treating wind like it was a single uniform number, instead of what it actually was, a complex 3-dimensional flow of air with layers and eddies and shifts that changed every few hundred yards. "They're reading the wind wrong," Kit said, not to the corporal, to herself. But she said it out loud. The corporal looked confused. He had the kind of high and tight haircut, so fresh, the skin above his ears still showed razor burn in the pink flush of youth. Ma'am, I need you to leave the area now. I understand, but that spotter is only reading near wind. At 2,000 yards, they need to account for ma'am. The corporal's voice carried an edge now, professional courtesy hardening into official warning. I'm not going to ask again. You need to leave immediately, or I'll have to call the MPS. At the firing point, one of the instructors noticed the commotion. He was a gunnery sergeant, maybe 34 or 35, with the kind of build that suggested he spent more time in the gym than strictly necessary for his job. Broad shoulders, thick neck, the confident stride of someone who'd spent years having people immediately obey his orders. He approached with that stride now, each step deliberate. What's the problem, Corporal? Civilian wandered into the restricted area, Gunny. I'm escorting her out. The gunnery sergeant looked at Kit with an expression she'd seen 1,000 times over her career. The particular look reserved for old people who don't know their place anymore. Patience worn thin, condescension barely concealed. A mixture that read he was being professional, but would really prefer if she'd just disappear. Ma'am, this is an active training area for Marine Corps scout snipers. His voice had the practiced tone of someone explaining something to a child. It's dangerous and restricted. For your own safety, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area. Kit nodded slowly. Of course, gunnery sergeant. I apologize for the intrusion. She paused, let a beat of silence settle, then added, but before I go, I noticed your team has been missing that target for what looks like several hours now. I think I know why. The gunnery sergeant's expression shifted. The patience evaporated. Something harder took its place. Excuse me. The wind, Kit said simply. Your spotter is only reading the mirage at your firing point. He's not accounting for the fact that the wind at 800 yards is probably 15 to 20 degrees different from your position. And the wind at the target appears to be coming from almost due west, not southwest. At 2,000 yards, you're also dealing with Coriolis drift, about 8 to 10 inches to the right in the northern hemisphere at this range and latitude. Your shooter is compensating for wind drift, but not for the Earth's rotation. For a long moment, the gunnery sergeant just stared at her. Then he laughed. Not cruelly, but with the kind of amusement you'd show a child who'd just explained rocket science using crayons and imagination. Ma'am, with all due respect, these are Marine Scout snipers. They're the best precision marksmen in the world. They've been through months of specialized training. They know how to read wind, and they definitely know about Coriolis effect. From the firing point, one of the snipers called out, Gunny, we're ready for another attempt. Stand by, the gunnery sergeant called back. He looked at Kit again, patience completely gone now. I appreciate your interest in what we do, ma'am. But this is advanced long-range marksmanship. These Marines have been trained by the best instructors in the Corps. They know what they're doing. Kit met his eyes, kept her voice level. Then why have they been missing for 3 hours? The question landed like a rifle shot in the sudden silence. The gunnery sergeant's jaw tightened. His eyes went cold. Behind him, the Marines at the firing point had stopped their preparation to watch the exchange. The corporal looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Ma'am, the gunnery sergeant's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. I'm done being polite. You need to leave this area right now. Corporal, escort this lady back to the public area. If she refuses, call the MPS and we'll handle this officially. Kit nodded slowly. She'd said her piece. Time to go. I meant no disrespect, gunnery sergeant. I was just trying to help. She turned to leave. The corporal's hand was already on her elbow, firm, but not rough, ready to guide her away from the firing line. She'd take 3 steps before everything changed. Wait, hold on a second. Let her speak. The voice came from the firing point. Everyone turned. The man who'd spoken was a major, older than the others, maybe mid-40s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent serious years in combat zones. Not the fresh-faced deployment cherry look. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things and carried them. He was walking toward them now, with deliberate steps, his eyes fixed on Kit with an intensity that suggested more than casual interest. Sir, the gunnery sergeant said, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. The major ignored him. He stopped directly in front of Kit. For a long moment, he just studied her face. His eyes moved from the faded baseball cap to the worn canvas jacket to something else. Something intangible that you could only recognize if you'd been there yourself. The way a veteran could spot another veteran in a crowd of civilians. What's your name? The major asked. Catherine Bridger. You prior service? Yes, sir. Marines, retired in 2021. What unit? Kit hesitated. This was always the moment she dreaded. The moment when people either didn't believe her or suddenly treated her completely differently. There was no middle ground. 1st Marine Division, Scout Sniper Instructor, School Quantico. The Major's eyes widened slightly. Just a fraction, but enough. Rank Master Gunnery Sergeant when I retired. And before you were an instructor, Kit sighed quietly. 2nd Force Reconnaissance Scout Sniper Platoon. 32 years in reconnaissance and sniper units before I transferred to the training command. The Major went very still. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He came to attention, rendered a sharp salute. Master Guns Bridger. His voice carried across the range, now formal and respectful. Sir, I'm Major David Bennett. I was a student in your Advanced Scout Sniper course at Quantico in 2002. You probably don't remember me. I was one of 40 students that year. But I remember you. Everyone who went through that course remembers you. Kit returned the salute muscle memory from 5 decades of service taking over without conscious thought. Her arms snapped up crisp and clean despite the arthritis. Bennett, you were the lieutenant who couldn't get comfortable with the M40A1. Preferred the M24 because of the trigger. The Major's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. You do remember. You spent 3 extra evenings with me working on trigger control. Said I was jerking like I was pulling a car out of a ditch instead of pressing like I was touching something precious. I still hear your voice every single time I take a shot. The gunnery sergeant had gone pale. The snipers at the firing point had abandoned their equipment entirely and were walking over, now drawn by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The corporal who'd been escorting Kit away had released her elbow and stepped back looking confused. Master Guns Bridger, Bennett said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear now, is probably the most accomplished scout sniper in Marine Corps history. 3 tours in Lebanon and Beirut in the 80s, Panama during Just Cause, both Gulf Wars, Iraq during the invasion and the surge, Afghanistan. She has 127 confirmed kills across 4 decades of combat service. He paused. Let that sink in, then continued. But that doesn't even begin to capture her real contribution to this Corps. Master Guns Bridger wrote the Advanced Wind Reading Manual that still required reading in every sniper school. Not contributed to it. Wrote it. Every technique you've been taught about reading layered winds, about compensating for Coriolis, about environmental factors affecting bullet flight, all of it came from her or from instructors she personally trained. The gunnery sergeant looked like he wanted the desert to open up and swallow him. Master Guns, why, I had no idea. I apologize. You were doing your job, Gunny, Kit said gently. I shouldn't have been in the restricted area. You were right to question me. But you were right about the wind, Bennett said. Weren't you? Kit looked toward the 2,000-yard target. Her eyes tracked the terrain between the firing point and the distant silhouette with the automatic assessment that came from 10,000 hours of practice. At this range in these conditions, you're dealing with at least 3 distinct wind layers. The mirage at your firing point shows southwest wind at 12 to 15 miles per hour. But if you watch the vegetation at 800 yards, she pointed, you can see it's moving almost due south. That's not 12 to 15. That's 18 to 20, and the angle has shifted by at least 15 degrees. And at the target, that flag is nearly limp, maybe 8 miles per hour from the west, possibly northwest. That's 3 completely different wind conditions. She paused, then continued. Your spotter is giving wind calls based on what he can see here at the firing point. But the bullet isn't here at the firing point for very long. It's in flight for almost 4 seconds at 2,000 yards. 4 seconds of traveling through all those different wind layers. Each one is pushing the bullet differently. You can't average those winds. You have to read each layer individually, estimate the total cumulative effect, and compensate for the vector sum, not the arithmetic mean. One of the snipers spoke up, a sergeant with the lean, intense look of someone who took the profession seriously. Master Guns, we've been compensating for 3.2 feet of wind drift to the left. We calculated it based on an average wind speed of 12 miles per hour from the southwest. That's your problem, Kit said. You're averaging winds that don't average. The wind at 800 yards is stronger and from a different direction. It's pushing your bullet south more than west. The wind at the target is weaker, but from the west, pushing the bullet back east slightly. They don't cancel each other out. They compound in ways that you can't calculate with simple averaging. You need to read each wind layer individually, understand what it's doing to your bullet at that point in the trajectory, and make an educated guess about the total cumulative effect. And the Coriolis, another sniper asked. At 2,000 yards at this latitude, we're at roughly 34 degrees north. You're looking at approximately 8 to 10 inches of horizontal drift to the right. It's not enough to cause a complete miss, but it's enough to turn a center mass hit into a marginal hit. At extreme range, the Earth's rotation matters. Your bullet is in the air long enough that the target has literally moved slightly by the time the round arrives. Bennett nodded slowly, then asked the question Kit had been both hoping for and dreading. Master Guns, would you be willing to demonstrate? The gunnery sergeant looked deeply uncomfortable now. Sir, is that appropriate? I mean, no disrespect to Master Guns Bridger, but there are regulations about civilian access to weapon systems. Bennett cut him off with a look. Master Guns Bridger has more time behind a scope than everyone on this range combined, and she maintains her expert qualification. I checked her record in the system while we were talking. She still shoots twice a year at a civilian range in Barstow. Still qualifies expert with both rifle and pistol. She's not a civilian in any meaningful sense. She's a Marine. She'll always be a Marine. Kit felt something warm bloom in her chest at those words. Something that had been cold and dormant for years. Recognition, respect, the feeling of being seen. But doubt crept in immediately after. Major, I appreciate that, but I haven't shot at 2,000 yards in years. My hands. She held them up. The tremor was visible. Not severe, but undeniable. I have early-stage Parkinson's with arthritic complications. I'm not sure I can... Ma'am, Bennett interrupted gently. With respect, I just watched you analyze this entire range in about 90 seconds and diagnose problems we've been struggling with all morning. I'd consider it an honor if you'd show my Marines how it's done. The walk to the firing point felt like walking through memory. Every step took Kit backward through time, back to when her knees didn't hurt with every movement, back to when her hands were steady, back to when she was Master Gunnery Sergeant Bridger, the instructor everyone feared and respected. The group of Marines fell in around her like students around a professor, curious, eager, some skeptical, but willing to be convinced. The rifle waiting at the firing point was an M40A5, the Marine Corps standard bolt-action sniper rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. Kit picked it up with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact. Her hands found the balance point automatically. Muscle memory from thousands of repetitions. The weight was familiar, comforting. For just a moment, holding that rifle, Kit wasn't 76 years old. She wasn't retired. She wasn't invisible. She was home. Kit settled into the prone position. Her body automatically found the proper alignment despite her age and the arthritis screaming in her joints. The hard-packed desert ground wasn't kind to 76-year-old bones. Her knees protested. Her hips complained. Her lower back, where the shrapnel lived, sent sharp reminders that she wasn't built for this anymore. But once she was set, once her body locked into the position she'd held 10,000 times before it all felt right. Spotter, she said quietly, falling into the old rhythm of fireteam communication. The sergeant who'd been spotting moved next to her with his high-powered optic. Ready, Master Guns? Kit chambered around. The bolt slid forward with the mechanical precision of quality engineering. She settled her cheek against the stock. Found the scope picture. Her breathing slowed automatically. In through the nose, deep into the diaphragm. Out through the mouth, controlled and even. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to what she could see through the 16-power magnification. The target at 2,000 yards looked impossibly small. A black silhouette representing a human torso, dancing slightly in the heat mirage rising from the desert floor. Wind at firing point, Kit murmured more to herself than anyone listening. Southwest 12 to 15. Vegetation at 800 shows south wind, stronger approximately 18 to 20. Target flag shows west at 8 to 10. 3 distinct layers with angular shifts. Her hands moved to the elevation turret. Click, click, click. Each click was 1 minute of angle. Approximately 2 inches of adjustment at 200 yards. At 2,000 yards, each click moved the point of impact about 20 inches. She needed elevation to compensate for bullet drop. At this range, with this ammunition, approximately 62 minutes of angle. Then the windage turret. This was harder, more complex. She wasn't compensating for a single wind value. She was compensating for the sum total of 3 different wind conditions acting on the bullet during its 4-second flight. The math ran through her head automatically. Decades of practice had turned calculation into instinct. Southwest wind at 15 miles per hour for the first 500 yards would push the bullet approximately 0.8 feet left. South wind at 19 miles per hour from 500 to 1,400 yards would push it approximately 2.1 feet left. West wind at 9 miles per hour from 1,400 to 2,000 yards would push it approximately 0.6 feet right. Vector sum, approximately 2.3 feet left. But that didn't account for the angular shifts between wind directions. That added complexity. She estimated another zero point 0.4 feet of lateral drift from the changing angles. Total wind compensation 2.7 feet left, approximately 16 inches. Then Coriolis. At 2,000 yards, 34 degrees north latitude firing east, the Coriolis effect would drift the bullet approximately 9 inches right. Net compensation, 16 inches left. 9 inches right equals 7 inches net left drift. All of that math happened in perhaps 5 seconds. Instinct born from repetition. Her hands made the adjustments. Click, click, click. The breathing stopped at the natural respiratory pause. That moment between exhaling and inhaling when the body is perfectly still. When your heartbeat is the only movement. Her finger settled on the trigger. Not on the first joint like a novice would do. Not on the pad. In that perfect place between the joint and the pad that every master shooter eventually found through feel rather than instruction. The squeeze was so gradual that even Kit didn't know exactly when the rifle would fire. That was the secret. You didn't pull the trigger. You increased pressure so slowly that the shot surprised you. The rifle fired. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder. Familiar, almost gentle because she'd locked her position properly. Through the scope, she watched the target. At 2,000 yards, you couldn't see the bullet. The human eye can't track something moving that fast, but you could see the effect. 4 seconds of flight time felt like 4 hours. Impact, the spotter said. His voice carried something between shock and reverence. Center mass, dead center of the target. The Marines watching went silent. Absolute silence. Kit worked the bolt. The spent casing ejected in a brass arc. She chambered another round with the smooth mechanical motion of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Once could be luck, she said. Let me confirm. The second shot took another 4 seconds of flight. Impact, center mass, 1 inch right of the previous hole. She fired a third time. Same process. Same calculations. Same perfect trigger, squeeze. Impact, center mass, 3 rounds, total groove size 3 inches at 2,000 yards. Kit cleared the weapon. Locked the bolt to the rear. Slowly, carefully got to her feet. Her knees screamed in protest. Her back sent lightning bolts of pain. Major Bennett moved to help her stand. She accepted the help without shame. At 76, pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Every Marine on that firing line stood in stunned silence, staring at the old woman who'd just accomplished in 3 shots what they'd been unable to do in 3 hours in 23 failed attempts. Kit looked at them, at their young faces, their shock, their dawning respect. The key, she said, her instructor voice returning naturally after years of dormancy, is to stop thinking of wind as a single number. At extreme range, you're not shooting through uniform conditions. You're shooting through an atmosphere that's constantly moving in complex 3-dimensional patterns. Near wind, mid-range wind, far wind, they're all different. They're all affecting your bullet. You need to read them all individually. She pointed downrange. Watch vegetation at multiple distances. Watch mirage at multiple ranges. Look for flags, dust devils, anything that shows you air movement at different points along your bullet's path. At 800 yards, those bushes are moving more vigorously than anything at your firing point. That tells you the wind is stronger there. The target flag is almost limp. That tells you the wind is weaker at the target. Your bullet spends the most time in that mid-range wind zone, so that's your primary consideration. But you can't ignore the others. The sergeant, who'd been shooting all morning, stepped forward. His earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by genuine humility. Master Guns, I apologize for our earlier dismissal. We were arrogant. You were confident, Kit corrected gently. There's a difference. Confidence is necessary in this profession. You need it to take shots that matter. But confidence without humility is dangerous. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop learning. And in our profession, the moment you stop learning is the moment someone dies who shouldn't have. Major Bennett had been making phone calls during the exchange. Now he approached Kit with a proposition she hadn't expected. Master Guns, I need to speak with you about something serious. We have a problem in the Corps right now. We're graduating scout snipers faster than we can properly train them. Our deployment tempo is high, our training tempo is even higher, and our institutional knowledge is thin. We've lost a lot of the hard-won lessons that your generation learned through actual combat experience. We're producing technically proficient shooters, but we're not producing masters. Kit waited. She could sense where this was going. The Marine Corps has a civilian contractor program for retired subject matter experts. The pay isn't much, $28 an hour for up to 24 hours a week. But you'd have base access, range time, and most importantly, you'd be training the next generation of Marine snipers, teaching them the things that aren't in the manuals, the things that can only come from someone who's done it at the highest level for 4 decades. Kit looked out across the desert range, the mountains in the distance, the heat shimmer rising from the sand, this place where she'd spent so much of her life. She thought about her empty house in Yucca Valley. The silence that waited there, the slow fade into irrelevance that retirement had become, the medication she took every morning for tremors that would eventually steal her last remaining skill. Then she thought about the Marines she'd just helped, the way understanding had dawned on their faces, the way they'd listened, the way they wanted to learn. Purpose. That's what this was. Purpose. I'd have to think about it, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew her answer. Bennett extended his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. Of course, Master Guns. No pressure. But please seriously consider it. The Marine Corps needs you. These young Marines need you. And honestly, I think you need this too. I can see it in your eyes. You're not done serving yet. Kit shook his hand. I'll call you next week with my answer, Major. But she'd already decided. Sitting in that empty house for 6 more years, watching her hands deteriorate, waiting for death. That wasn't living. That was just existing. This teaching, passing on knowledge that could save lives. This was living. The gunnery sergeant approached her as she prepared to leave. His name was Darius Kane. He looked genuinely contrite. Master Guns, before you go, I need to apologize more formally. What I said earlier, how I treated you, it was unprofessional and disrespectful. Kit studied him for a moment, read him the way she'd learned to read Wynn, young, proud, but not arrogant, good at his job but still learning, the kind of Marine who could become an excellent instructor if he learned humility. Gunny Kane, she said, you did exactly what you should have done. An unknown civilian wandered into your restricted training area. You protected your Marines and your mission. That's your job. I don't fault you for that. But I dismissed your knowledge without consideration. I judged you based on appearance. And I learned a long time ago not to take offense at that. I'm a 76-year-old woman in civilian clothes. You had no way of knowing who I was. What I want you to learn from this isn't that you should treat old people better. What I want you to learn is that you should never assume anyone has nothing to teach you. Stay humble, stay curious, and never judge someone's worth by their appearance or age. Kane nodded seriously. Understood, Master Guns. If you do come back as a contractor, I'd be honored to learn from you. We'll see, Gunny. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when Kit climbed back into her truck. The drive home took her through the same unchanging desert, but something had changed. The house would still be empty when she arrived. The silence would still be waiting. But tomorrow she'd have somewhere to go, someone to teach, something that mattered. Catherine Bridger, 76 years old, 127 confirmed kills. Author of the manual that trained a generation of snipers, smiled as she drove. The smile stayed with her through the empty house, through her evening routine, through her medication that barely controlled the tremors anymore. That night, she called Major Bennett. I accept your offer. When do I start? How about next Monday? I'll have all the paperwork ready. Monday works. After she hung up, Kit sat on her porch with evening coffee. The desert had gone dark except for the stars. More stars than she'd ever seen anywhere else. The Mojave at night was a cathedral of light. She thought about the road ahead, teaching Marines who were younger than her sons, sharing knowledge accumulated over 4 decades, racing against her own deteriorating body to pass on everything she knew before the tremors made it impossible. A year, maybe. That's what the doctor had said. Maybe less before her hands wouldn't steady for a shot anymore. But what was a year measured against the potential to save lives? If she taught 50 Marines and each one went to combat better prepared, and even one of them made a shot that saved American lives because of something she taught them, then wasn't that worth it? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, her oldest son. Mom, just checking in. You okay out there by yourself? She typed back, better than okay, I just got a job offer. Starting Monday, teaching Marines again. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Mom, you're 76. Are you sure that's safe? She smiled as she typed, probably not, but it's necessary. I'll explain this weekend. Love you. Kit finished her coffee, went inside, took her evening medication, looked at her trembling hands in the bathroom mirror. One more mission, she whispered to her reflection. Just one more. The hand steadied, just slightly, but enough. In the morning, she'd begin preparing lessons, organizing the stories she'd tell, the techniques she'd demonstrate, the knowledge she'd pass forward. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, Catherine Bridger slept without the nightmares. Because she had purpose again. And purpose, she'd learned over 76 years, was the only medicine that actually worked. 2 weeks later, Kit stood in front of 12 Marine Scout sniper students in a climate-controlled classroom that smelled of gun oil, instant coffee, and the particular scent of young Marines who'd been working hard. The students were younger than she'd expected, most in their mid-20s, 2 women among the 10 men. All of them had graduated basic sniper school. All of them had that confidence that came from being selected for elite training. Kit recognized that confidence. She'd worn it herself 40 years ago. Gunnery Sergeant Darius Kane stood at the back of the room. He'd made it clear in their planning sessions that he wasn't entirely sure about a 76-year-old civilian contractor teaching his Marines no matter how impressive her record. No disrespect, Master Guns, he'd said in their pre-brief, but these students need current tactics, modern battlefield applications. I'm not sure how relevant techniques from the 80s and 90s are to today's fight. Kit had smiled. Gunny gravity hasn't changed since the 80s. Wind still blows the same direction. Bullets still follow the laws of physics. The fundamentals are eternal. The technology changes, but the principles don't. Give me 2 weeks. If I'm wasting their time, I'll resign. Now, standing in front of the class, she didn't waste time with credentials or introductions. She just started talking. Last session at the range, I taught you about reading layered winds, about not treating wind as a single number, but as a complex three-dimensional environment. That was lesson 1 learned in Panama in 1989 during Operation Just Cause. Today, I'm going to tell you about Beirut in 1985, about the day every piece of technology I owned failed, and the only thing that saved lives was what I'd learned before I started depending on machines. She had their attention now. Even Kane leaned forward slightly. But first, a question. How many of you have backup iron sights on your rifles? Every hand went up. How many of you have actually qualified using only iron sights at ranges beyond 500 yards? The hands dropped. 2 remained, then 1, then none. That's what I thought, Kit said. We're going to fix that this week. Because I promise you, the day your electronics fail, the day your batteries die, the day your scope gets damaged is the day you'll wish you'd listened to this story. She took a breath, let the silence build, then began. Beirut, 1985. I was 37 years old, and I was about to learn that technology is a tool, not a replacement for skill. Panama, 1989. Kit paused before beginning the Panama story. Let the students settle. Let anticipation build. But before I tell you about Beirut, she said, let me tell you about how I learned to read layered winds in the first place. Because Master Guns Douglas Webb taught me in Panama what I'm about to teach you, and what you'll teach the Marines who come after you. That's how knowledge stays alive, through the chain of teachers and students that never breaks. She could see they were ready now, hungry for the story. Panama, December 1989, Operation Just Cause. I was 41 years old, a gunnery sergeant attached to 1st Battalion 6th Marines, and I thought I knew everything about long-range shooting. Kit smiled slightly. I was wrong. The classroom was silent, 12 students leaning forward, Kane at the back, arms crossed but listening. The air in Panama felt like breathing through a wet towel, humidity so thick you could see it, heat that made your uniform stick to your skin before you'd been outside for 5 minutes. We were tasked with securing Tocumen International Airport so our C-100s could land and bring in more troops. My job was overwatch, protecting the engineers who were clearing the runway of debris and obstacles. Kit walked to the whiteboard, drew a quick diagram, firing position, runway, tree line. The position they gave me was a maintenance building rooftop, 1,600 yards from the tree line where intelligence said enemy forces were dug in. Good sight lines, clear field of fire. But the wind conditions were a nightmare. She tapped the diagram. At my position, the wind was coming from the east at maybe 8 miles per hour. Steady, manageable. I could feel it on my face. My spotter corporal, Jimmy Reeves, good kid, smart, excellent with numbers, he read the mirage at our position and gave me a wind call. 8 miles per hour east to west, just 2.1 feet left. The math was perfect. The observation was accurate, but it was incomplete. Kit paused. Let that word hang. Incomplete, because between my position and the target, the terrain changed. Open tarmac, jungle edge, heat rising from the concrete creating thermal columns. And each of those environments had different wind conditions. But I didn't know that yet. I was about to learn it the hard way. The students were completely focused now. Target appears. Armed fighter moving through the tree line toward the runway where our engineers were working. My spotter confirms. I make my correction based on the wind call. 2.1 feet left. I take the shot. Kit's voice dropped. The round goes wide by 3 feet. She let the failure sit there. Let them feel it. 3 feet at 1,600 yards. That's not a small miss. That's a fundamental error. The fighter disappears into cover, and 30 seconds later, mortars start falling on the runway. 2 Marines take shrapnel. One loses his leg below the knee. The other takes metal in his back that he'll carry for the rest of his life. The entire operation grinds to a halt while we call in counter battery fire. Kit's hands trembled slightly, not from Parkinson's, from the memory. I felt that failure like a physical wound. My spotter was rechecking his calculations, confused because the math was right. And that's when Master Gunnery Sergeant Douglas Webb came up to our position. She smiled slightly at the memory. Master Guns Webb was 62 years old, closer to retirement than recruitment. He'd been a sniper in Korea, then again in the early days of Vietnam. He'd made shots I could only dream about, and he'd seen me fail. Kit returned to the whiteboard, started adding details to her diagram. Webb sat down next to me, pulled out his binoculars, and started glassing the terrain between our position and the target area. Didn't say anything for maybe 5 minutes, just looked. Then he asked me a question. Gunny Bridger, where's your bullet right now? I didn't understand the question. I said, it's downrange master guns, probably embedded in a tree somewhere. He said, no, I mean right now in your mind. When you're calculating your shot, where is your bullet? Kit looked at her students. I told him it was at my position. That's where I was reading the wind. That's where my spotter was giving calls from. And Webb said something I'll never forget. That's your problem, Gunny. You're reading the wind where you are. You're not reading the wind where the bullet is. She added more details to the diagram. Wind directions at different ranges. Webb pointed downrange. See that tarmac at 800 yards. Look at the heat shimmer. That's not the same as here. That's a thermal column. Rising air probably 15 to 20 miles per hour vertical. Your bullet passes through that, it gets pushed. Now look at the vegetation at 1,200 yards. Those palm trees, see how they're bending? That's not 8 miles per hour. That's closer to 15, and it's coming from southeast, not due east. Kit's voice grew more animated as she relived the lesson. I looked through my scope, really looked this time, and I saw what he meant. The wind wasn't one uniform thing. It was a river with currents, eddies, different flows at different depths. I've been treating it like a single number when it was actually a complex three-dimensional environment. Webb spent the next 3 hours teaching me how to read plant movement at different distances, how thermals created by sun-heated concrete affected bullet trajectory, how to estimate wind speed without instruments just by watching how vegetation moved, how to add up the total effect of multiple wind layers instead of averaging them. Kit drew vectors on the board, added them up. When the next target appeared, I took my time. I read the wind at my position, then at 400 yards watching how dust moved on the tarmac. At 800 where the heat shimmer was strongest. At 1,200 where palm trees showed me the true wind speed and direction. At the target itself where I could see leaves moving. 5 different wind conditions. 5 different pieces of data. I calculated the total effect in my head, not averaging them, adding the vectors, making my best educated guess about the cumulative push from all those invisible forces. She paused. The shot took me 5 minutes to prepare. Webb didn't rush me, just watched, waited. I fired. Kit's voice dropped to almost a whisper. 1,600 yards, center mass. The fighter went down. She let the silence hold for a moment. 6 Marines on that runway owed their lives to that shot. They never knew it. They were too busy working, too focused on their own jobs. But I knew, and Webb knew. Kit looked at each student in turn. Before he left my position, Webb put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That's lesson 1, Gunny. Wind isn't a number on a calculator. It's a landscape. You need to learn to read it the same way you'd read terrain, with your eyes, with your experience, with understanding that comes from practice and patience." She walked back to the front of the classroom. That was 35 years ago, and I still use what Master Guns Webb taught me that day. Every single shot, the demonstration you saw 2 weeks ago at the range 2,800 yards, I made that shot by reading wind in layers, by treating it as a 3-dimensional environment instead of a single number. Kit looked at her students. Tomorrow we go to the range, and you're going to learn to read wind the way Webb taught me. Not with instruments, not with calculators, with observation, with patience. with the understanding that at extreme range, you're not shooting through one wind, you're shooting through 5 or 6 different conditions and each one matters. One of the students raised his hand. Master Guns, how long did it take you to get good at this? Kit smiled. I'm still getting good at it. After 35 years, I'm still learning. That's what you need to understand. Mastery isn't a destination, it's a direction. You never arrive, you just keep getting better. Or you should if you're doing it right. She paused. And that's why we have teachers. Why we have this chain of knowledge passing from generation to generation. Webb taught me. I taught hundreds of Marines at Quantico. They taught thousands more. And now you're part of that chain. When you leave this course, you'll teach others. You'll add your own experiences to what I'm giving you. You'll make it better. That's how knowledge grows. That's how we honor the people who taught us. The class ended. Students filed out talking among themselves, discussing what they learned, already planning how they'd approach the range training tomorrow. Kane approached Kit. His expression had changed from their first meeting. Less skepticism, more respect. Master Guns, I need to apologize. I thought you'd be teaching outdated techniques. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to question Gunny, Kit said. You should question everything. Test everything. But don't forget that some principles are eternal. Physics doesn't change. Wind dynamics don't change. The technology we use to measure them changes, but the fundamentals remain. The students are already talking about you, Kane said. Words spreading through the sniper community. They're calling you the wind reader. Said you can see things other people can't. Kit smiled. I can see the same things everyone else can see. I've just had more practice looking. That's the secret, Gunny. There is no secret, just time and repetition and the willingness to keep learning. That night back in her house in Yucca Valley, Kit took her medication. Her hands still trembled. The Parkinson's was progressing on schedule. The doctor had increased her dosage, but it barely helped anymore. She looked at her hands in the bathroom mirror, watched them shake. 1 year, she whispered. Maybe less. But she'd taught today. She'd passed on Webb's lesson to a new generation. Tomorrow she'd teach them about Beirut, about technology failure, about trusting fundamentals over machines. The knowledge was spreading, growing, living beyond her. That was enough. That was everything. Catherine Bridger, 76 years old, smiled at her trembling reflection. We're not done yet, she said. Her hands steadied, just for a moment, but it was enough. 2 weeks passed before Kit returned to 29 Palms. She'd called Major Bennett on Monday morning, accepted the contractor position on Tuesday, and spent Wednesday filling out paperwork that seemed designed to test her patience more than her qualifications. By Friday, she had a badge that granted her base access 3 days a week. By Monday, she was standing in front of 12 Marine Scout sniper students in an air-conditioned classroom that smelled of gun oil and instant coffee. The students were younger than she'd expected, most in their mid-20s. 2 women among the 10 men. All of them had passed basic sniper school. All of them thought they knew what they were doing. Kit recognized that confidence. She'd worn it herself once. Gunnery Sergeant Darius Kane stood at the back of the room. 34 years old, built like he could run through walls with dark skin and eyes that missed nothing. He was the lead instructor, and he'd made it clear in their pre-brief that he wasn't entirely comfortable with a 76-year-old woman teaching his Marines. No disrespect, Master Guns, he'd said, but these kids need current tactics, modern techniques. Kit had smiled. Gunny physics hasn't changed. Wind still blows, gravity still pulls, and bullets still kill people who don't respect the fundamentals. Give me 1 week. If I'm wasting their time, I'll leave. Now, standing in front of the class, she didn't introduce herself with credentials or accomplishments. She just started talking. Last session, I taught you about layered winds, reading what you can't feel. That was lesson 1 from Panama, 1989. Today, I'm going to tell you about Beirut, 1985, when every piece of technology I owned and failed, and the only thing that saved lives was what I'd learned before I started depending on machines. She had their attention. Even Kane leaned forward slightly. But first, a question. How many of you have backup iron sights on your rifles? Every hand went up. How many of you have actually qualified using only iron sights at ranges beyond 500 yards? The hands dropped. 2 remained, then 1, then none. That's what I thought, Kit said. We're going to fix that this week. Because the day your scope breaks, your ballistic computer dies, or your batteries run out, is the day you'll wish you'd listened to this story. Beirut, 1985. The Marine barracks bombing had happened 2 years earlier. 241 Americans dead. The mission had changed after that. No longer peacekeepers. Now they were a presence. a statement, and statements needed protection. Kit was 37, a staff sergeant assigned to provide overwatch for the remaining Marine positions in the city. Her position was a four-story building that had been a hotel before the Civil War. Now it was just another shell with good sightlines. The gear she'd been issued was state-of-the-art for 1985. A unertl scope with early range-finding reticles, a handheld ballistic calculator that ran on 4 AA batteries, a Kestrel weather meter, all the technology a sniper could want. She'd relied on it, trusted it, let it become a crutch. The morning of October 7th started normal. Kit glassed the streets watching for threats. The weather meter showed wind at 7 miles per hour northeast. The ballistic calculator gave her corrections for various ranges. The scope was crystal clear. At 1100 hours, everything changed. The building shook, not from incoming fire, from something else. Kit felt it through the concrete, a deep vibration that made her teeth ache. Later, she'd learn it was a car bomb 3 blocks away. Not aimed at Marines this time, but at a Lebanese militia position. The explosion was massive enough to create an electromagnetic pulse that fried electronics in a 6-block radius. Her scope's electronics died instantly. The range-finding reticle went dark. The ballistic calculator's screen showed nothing but static, then went black. The weather meter stopped responding. She was left with a rifle iron sights and her training. At 11:15, her radio crackled. "Overwatch, this is Convoy 1. We're moving to extract wounded from the blast site. Need eyes on Route 7. Route 7 ran directly through her field of fire, 1,200 yards from her position to the intersection where the convoy would be most vulnerable. Kit switched to iron sights. The tiny notch and post looked impossibly crude after months of using high-powered optics. She could see the intersection barely, but reading the situation at that distance with naked eyes was like trying to read a book across a football field. "Overwatch copies," she said into the radio. "I'm on it." Her spotter was Corporal Marcus Webb, no relation to the master guns who'd taught her in Panama. Young, nervous, holding a spotting scope that still worked because it was purely optical. "I've got movement in the buildings overlooking the intersection," Webb said. "3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. Can't tell if it's hostile." Kit looked through the iron sights. At 1,200 yards, even with perfect vision, you couldn't identify threats. You could only see shapes, movement. "Keep eyes on it," she said. She had no ballistic calculator to tell her corrections. No weather meter to measure wind. No range-finding reticle to confirm distance. Just her eyes, her brain, and everything she'd learned before the technology arrived. The range was 1,200 yards. She knew that from studying the map. The elevation correction would be approximately 32 minutes of angle. She could calculate that from the ballistic tables she'd memorized in sniper school, the ones everyone said you didn't need to memorize anymore because calculators existed. The wind was harder. She watched the flags on buildings between her position and the target, watched debris blowing through the streets, watched smoke from fires drifting. The wind was inconsistent, gusting, coming from the northeast at maybe 10 to 15 miles per hour. At 1,200 yards, that meant approximately 8 feet of drift. But which direction the buildings created wind tunnels? The streets channeled air in unpredictable ways. She couldn't read layered winds because she couldn't see vegetation or mirage clearly enough through iron sights. She had to guess. Educated, but still a guess. The convoy appeared on Route 7, 4 Humvees moving fast. They'd be exposed at the intersection for maybe 20 seconds. "Movement confirmed," Webb said. "3rd floor. I see a rifle barrel." Kit saw it too, a dark line protruding from the window. Could be a civilian with a hunting rifle protecting their home. Could be an enemy fighter waiting for the convoy. "Range?" she asked. Webb checked his scope. 1,210 yards. Kit made her corrections. Elevation based on memorized tables. Windage based on educated guessing and prayer. Her hands were steady despite the situation. Training took over when technology failed. The convoy entered the intersection. The rifle barrel in the window moved. Tracking. Kit's breathing stopped at the natural pause. Her finger found the trigger. The squeeze was gradual, perfect, exactly as she'd been trained before she had electronic triggers and advanced optics. The shot broke. She worked the bolt chambering another round, not waiting to see the impact. If she'd missed, she needed to be ready for a second shot. Through the iron sights, she saw the rifle barrel disappear from the window. No muzzle flash, no shot taken at the convoy. "Target down," Webb said, his voice shaking. "I saw him fall back from the window." Hit. The convoy cleared to the intersection. No shots fired, no casualties. Kit let out the breath she'd been holding. 6 hours later, after the electronics were restored, after the mission was complete, her commanding officer asked her about the shot. 1,200 yards with iron sights in combat conditions, he said. That's not in any manual. No, sir, Kit agreed. It's not, but the fundamentals are. Memorize ballistics, wind reading without instruments, trigger control. Those are all in the manual. Technology makes it easier, but technology fails. Training doesn't. The lesson stayed with her. When she became an instructor, she made every student qualify with iron sights, made them memorize ballistic tables even though calculators existed, made them estimate wind without weather meters. Because the day your technology fails might be the day lives depend on your shot. Kit finished the story and looked at her students. They sat in silence processing. Tomorrow, she said, we're going to the range. No scopes, no calculators, no weather meters, just your rifle's iron sights and what you can learn to do without technology. Because I promise you the day you need it most is the day your batteries will be dead. Kane approached her after class. His expression had changed. Less skepticism, more respect. Master Guns, I owe you an apology. I thought you'd be teaching outdated techniques. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to question, Kit said. Question everything. Test everything. But don't forget that modern and effective aren't always the same thing. The students are talking about you, Kane said. Word's spreading. You're becoming something of a legend around here. Kit smiled. Legends are dead people, Gunny. I'm just old. There's a difference. That night in her house in Yucca Valley, Kit took her medication for the arthritis. Her hands had trembled more than usual during the day. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. It's progressive, manageable for now, but eventually her hands wouldn't steady. Eventually she wouldn't be able to demonstrate what she was teaching. But not today. Today she could still shoot, still teach, still matter. The next morning at the range, she proved it. The Marines struggled with iron sights at first. Missed targets they could have hit easily with scopes. Got frustrated. Wanted to quit. Kit didn't let them. Again, she'd say after each miss, read the wind, trust your calculations, trust your training. By the end of the day, every Marine had qualified at 800 yards using only iron sights. Not pretty, not perfect, but combat effective. Kane pulled her aside. I've never seen students improve that fast. What's your secret? No secret, Kit said. I just don't let them quit. And I show them it's possible by doing it myself. She'd taken several demonstration shots throughout the day. Iron sights only, 800 yards. Every shot had been within a 6-inch circle. Your hands, Kane said. I notice they shake when you're not shooting. Kit met his eyes. Arthritis, early stage. When I focus on a shot, the tremor stops. Adrenaline maybe, or muscle memory so deep it overrides the condition. I don't know, but I know I can still shoot. That's what matters. How long do you have? Doctor says maybe a year before it gets too bad, maybe less. Kane was quiet for a moment. Then we better make the most of the time. The following week brought story 3. Kit had been putting it off. This one was harder, more personal. The one that still woke her at 3 in the morning, sweating, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. She stood in front of the class on Wednesday morning and took a deep breath. Today's lesson is about failure, she said. About the shot you miss. The one that haunts you. The one that teaches you more than all your successes combined. The students shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to hear about failure. Gulf War, 1991. I was 43 years old. Staff sergeant. I thought I was invincible. Gulf War, 1991. The ground war had started. After weeks of airstrikes, coalition forces were pushing into Iraq. Kit's unit was attached to a Marine Expeditionary Force providing reconnaissance and sniper support. The mission was textbook. Advanced positions watching for enemy armor and artillery. Call in airstrikes when needed. Protect the advancing infantry. Kit's position was a low ridge overlooking Highway 8, the main road Iraqi forces were using to retreat from Kuwait. Intelligence said enemy units were falling back in disarray, that resistance would be minimal. Intelligence was wrong. At 0630, she spotted them. Iraqi Republican Guard units not retreating, but repositioning, setting up an ambush for the Marine column that was scheduled to use Highway 8 in less than an hour. We've got a problem, she told her spotter, Sergeant Linda Hayes. Count at least 40 enemy fighters. They're dug in, they're organized, and they're waiting. Hayes called it in. Command ordered an airstrike, but the weather had turned, sandstorm rolling in from the west. Close air support was grounded. Ground forces will have to handle it. The radio crackled. Can you provide overwatch? Affirmative, Kit replied. The range was 1,100 yards, not extreme by her standards. The wind was the problem. The approaching sandstorm created gusting, unpredictable conditions, 20 to 30 miles per hour shifting directions. At 0700, the Marine column appeared on Highway 8, 12 vehicles, approximately 60 Marines. The Iraqi forces held their fire, waiting for the column to enter the kill zone. Kit identified the enemy commander. A captain she guessed from his position and how the other fighters deferred to him. He was coordinating the ambush, waiting for the right moment. I can take him, Kit said. 1,100 yards. If we remove the commander, they might scatter. Wind's too unpredictable, Hayes said. Gusting 30. You don't have a clean read. I know, Kit calculated. Elevation was easy. 1,100 yards, she needed 28 minutes of angle. But the wind, the sandstorm created multiple layers all shifting. She couldn't read it accurately. She could only estimate. She estimated 22 miles per hour southwest. 6 feet of drift compensate left. But the wind was gusting, shifting. She was guessing more than calculating. The Marine column entered the kill zone. The Iraqi captain raised his hand. The signal to fire. Kit took the shot. The wind gusted. 22 miles per hour became 35. Southwest became south-southwest. The bullet went wide by 6 inches. Not a miss that hit dirt. A miss that hit the fighter standing next to the captain. The man went down, but the captain was untouched. The captain gave the order. The ambush opened up. RPGs streaked toward the Marine column. Machine gun fire raked the vehicles. The lead Humvee took a direct hit. Explosion, fire, screaming over the radio. Kit worked the bolt. Chambered another round. Found the captain again. He was moving now harder to target. She fired. Missed again. The wind was chaos. Hayes was calling in artillery support. The Marine column was fighting back, trying to break through, but they were pinned down, taking casualties. Kit kept shooting, kept missing. The wind betrayed her every time. By the time Marine reinforcements arrived, 3 vehicles were destroyed. 8 Marines were dead, 14 wounded. Among the dead was the pilot of a medical helicopter that tried to evacuate the wounded. Shot down by the enemy fighters Kit had failed to suppress. His name was Captain Richard Morrison. 32 years old, married, 2 children. The investigation cleared her. Combat conditions, impossible wind, no fault assigned. But Kit knew the truth. She'd rushed the shot, overcorrected for wind she couldn't accurately read. Let the pressure of the situation cloud her judgment. She'd missed. And Captain Morrison paid the price. Kit's voice broke as she finished the story. For the first time in all her years of teaching, tears ran down her face in front of students. I wanted to quit, she said. Wanted to request a transfer. Anything to not have to pick up a rifle again. But my commanding officer wouldn't let me. He said quitting would make Morrison's death meaningless. Learning from it, becoming a better sniper. Teaching others so they don't make the same mistake. That's how I honor him. The classroom was silent. Several students had tears in their eyes. Even Kane looked affected. So that's lesson 3, Kit said, wiping her face. You will fail. You will miss. People might die because of it. You don't get to quit. You get to learn. You get to be better. You get to make sure their deaths teach you something that saves other lives later. One of the female students raised her hand. Master Guns, how do you live with that? Kit looked at her, really looked at her. You don't live with it. You live for it. Every shot I take, I think of Captain Morrison. Every student I train, I'm trying to prevent another sniper from making my mistake. That's not living with failure. That's turning failure into purpose. After class, Kane approached her. I looked up Captain Morrison, he said quietly. His widow remarried. His kids are grown now, successful. They don't know you. I know, Kit said. Does that bother you? No, it would bother me more if they did. If they knew I was the reason he didn't come home. Kane was quiet for a moment. You know that shot was impossible, right? In those conditions, with that wind, no one could have made it. Someone better might have. No, Master Guns. Someone luckier might have. There's a difference. Kit shook her head. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Gunny, but I need to carry this. It makes me a better teacher. That weekend, Kit drove to San Diego. She'd done it every year since 1992, the cemetery where Captain Morrison was buried. She stood at his grave for an hour, didn't say anything, just stood there remembering. She'd never told his family, never reached out. What would she say? I'm the one who missed the shot that might have saved him. That would just transfer her pain to them. But she came every year to remember, to recommit, to make sure she never forgot the cost of failure. On Monday, she walked into the classroom and started lesson 4. Iraq, 2006. By then I was 58 years old, a master gunnery sergeant, and I was about to learn that the hardest shots aren't the longest. They're the ones you take while teaching someone else to shoot. Iraq 2006, Fallujah was a different kind of war. Urban, close, brutal. The Marine Corps had learned from the early days of the invasion. Now they were training Iraqi security forces trying to build an army that could defend its own country. Kit was part of that effort, training Iraqi counter-sniper teams. It was delicate work, cultural sensitivity, language barriers, teaching people who'd been fighting Americans just months before to now fight alongside them. The team she was assigned had 12 Iraqi soldiers, 10 men, 2 women. In a society where women barely left their homes, these two were revolutionary. And they faced opposition from everyone, including their male teammates. Kit saw herself in them, younger, fighting for respect in a profession that didn't want them. One of the women, Amina, showed real talent, quick learner, steady hands, good instincts. But she struggled with one concept, Coriolis effect. Kit tried explaining it with math. Amina didn't understand. Tried diagrams, still confused. The interpreter was struggling to find Arabic words for concepts like Earth's rotation and Coriolis force. They were in a forward operating base teaching in a classroom that used to be a school. Mortar attacks were common. You learned to teach through them to keep going unless the rounds were falling within the wire. On the third day, mortars started falling closer. The interpreter ducked. The male Iraqi soldiers grabbed their rifles. But Amina stayed focused. "I need to understand," she said through the interpreter once he composed himself. "My brother died because of a miss. If I cannot understand this, I will miss too." Kit looked at her, saw the determination, the need, and she had an idea. She grabbed a metal plate from the dining facility, set it on the ground, spun it. "This is Earth," she said. "Spinning, always spinning." She placed a marble at the edge, let it roll as the plate spun. "This is your bullet. It flies straight, yes, but the Earth beneath it is moving. By the time the bullet arrives, the target has moved slightly because the Earth rotated." Amina watched the marble's path curve relative to the spinning plate. Her eyes widened. "I understand it," she said in a broken English. "Earth moves, bullet flies straight, they don't match." "Exactly." Another mortar round impacted. Closer. The building shook. Kit kept teaching. In the northern hemisphere at long range, the drift is always right. About 10 inches at 2,000 yards. You must compensate. Amina nodded. "Always right, I remember." The next day they went to a range outside the wire. Dangerous, exposed. But Amina needed to apply what she'd learned. The target was 1,900 yards. The conditions were terrible. Heat distortion, mirage. Wind shifting with the afternoon thermals. Kit coached Amina through every step. Wind reading, elevation, and Coriolis correction. "Remember," Kit said, 10 inches right. Amina made the adjustment, took the shot. At 1,900 yards, the bullet flew for almost 4 seconds. It hit 3 inches from center. The male Iraqi soldiers stared, some in respect, some in resentment, but all of them saw proof that Amina belonged. 2 weeks later, Amina used that same technique to protect a coalition patrol from an enemy sniper. 1,900-yard shot, dead center. 7 Marines and 4 Iraqi soldiers lived because of it. When Kit rotated home, Amina gave her a gift, a scarf her grandmother had woven. "You taught me more than shooting," Amina said through the interpreter. "You taught me that being different is not being less." Kit still had that scarf, kept it in her closet. On hard days when the arthritis was bad, when the loneliness felt overwhelming, she'd take it out and remember. Teaching wasn't just about technique. It was about proving to people that they could do things they thought were impossible. Back in the classroom at 29 Palms, Kit finished the story. "Lesson 4, she said, "the best way to learn is to teach. When you have to break down a concept so someone else understands it, you understand it better yourself. When you watch a student succeed using what you taught them, you remember why this profession matters." She paused. Amina was killed in 2008, IED. She was protecting a girls' school, but the 7 Marines she saved with that shot in '06, they're still alive. Some of them have kids now, families, lives, because Amina learned to compensate for Coriolis effect using a spinning plate and a marble. Kane stood up. "Master guns with permission. I'd like to add that teaching method to our curriculum, the spinning plate demonstration." "Granted," and Kit said, "use it, improve it, make it better. That's how knowledge grows." The students filed out, but one stayed behind. The female Marine who'd asked earlier how Kit lived with failure. "Master Guns, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead. Do you have kids?" 2 sons, grown, on the East Coast. Do they understand what you do? Why it matters. Kit smiled sadly. Not really, they love me, but they worry. They think I should be retired taking it easy. They don't understand that this work is what keeps me alive. I get that, the Marine said. My dad's the same way. Keeps asking when I'm going to quit, find a safe job, settle down. He doesn't understand that I need this. What's your name, Marine? Corporal Sarah Mitchell, Master Guns. Well, Corporal Mitchell, here's what I've learned. The people who love us want us safe. That's not wrong, but sometimes safety isn't what we need. Sometimes we need purpose. Sometimes we need to know we matter. Don't apologize for that. Mitchell nodded. Thank you, Master Guns. After she left, Kit sat alone in the classroom. Her hands trembled. She took her medication. The tremor lessened, but didn't stop. A year, the doctor had said, maybe less, but today she'd taught lesson 4. She had 2 more to go, and then maybe she'd have given everything she had to give. The weeks accumulated like brass casings at a firing line. Kit taught 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The other days she spent alone in Yucca Valley, her hands trembling more with each passing week, her medication dosage increasing. But when she stood in front of the classroom, when she picked up a rifle, the tremor stopped. Purpose had its own kind of medicine. By late November, the students had transformed. They read wind in layers without thinking. They could calculate ballistics without computers. They understood that technology was a tool, not a replacement for skill. But Kit knew they hadn't learned the hardest lessons yet. Lesson 5 waited. She stood in front of the class on the first Wednesday of December. The desert outside had turned cold. Marines wore fleece jackets under their utilities. Inside, the heating system fought a losing battle against the chill. Afghanistan, Kit said. 2010. I was 62 years old. Too old according to the regulations. But someone decided they needed me anyway. They were wrong about that. I wasn't necessary. But I learned something there that you need to know. Something about what impossible actually means. Afghanistan 2010. The recall came out of nowhere. Kit had been retired for 2 years, living quietly in Yucca Valley. Thomas was still alive, then still healthy, and they'd been enjoying the kind of peace that came after decades of service. Then her phone rang. The voice on the other end was a colonel she'd trained 15 years earlier. Master Guns, we have a situation. We need you in Helmand Province. Civilian contractor, 6-month deployment. Sir, I'm 62, I'm retired. There are younger snipers. We don't need a sniper. We need you specifically. Female engagement teams are working with Afghan women, training them. Some of those women want to learn marksmanship. We need a female instructor who has credibility with both our Marines and Afghan culture. You're the only one who fits. Thomas had encouraged her to go. You're dying here, Kit, slowly. Go do what you're good at. I'll be here when you get back. She went. Helmand Province was everything she'd heard and worse. Heat that felt like standing inside an oven. Dust that got into everything. Constant threat of IEDs, snipers, mortars. The kind of environment where you measured success by surviving another day. The female engagement teams were doing important work, building relationships with Afghan women, providing medical care, education, security. And some of those women wanted to fight back against the Taliban fighters who'd brutalized their communities for years. Kit's job was to teach them. The problem was cultural, not from the Afghan women. They were eager, motivated, desperate to learn. The problem was from the Marine Command, male officers who didn't believe Afghan women could be effective shooters, who saw the training program as a publicity stunt, who made it clear they expected Kit to fail. The resistance came to a head 2 weeks into the deployment. A lieutenant colonel, 48 years old, chest full of ribbons, called a meeting. Master Guns, I respect what you're trying to do here, but let's be realistic. These women have no military background, no shooting experience. You're not going to turn them into snipers in 6 months. I'm not trying to turn them into snipers, Kit said. I'm trying to teach them to shoot accurately enough to protect themselves and their communities. Even that's optimistic. Have you seen any of them shoot? Yes, sir, some show real aptitude. Show me, tomorrow. Demonstration on the range. If they can't perform, I'm pulling resources from this program. And the challenge was clear. Succeed or the program dies. The women lose their chance. The Marines who believed in the mission lose credibility. Kit spent that night with her interpreter explaining the situation to the Afghan women. There were 8 of them in the program, ages ranging from 19 to 42. Most had lost family members to Taliban violence. The youngest was Zara, 19 years old. Her entire family had been killed in a Taliban raid 3 years earlier. She'd survived by hiding. Now she wanted to fight back. "What must we do?" Zara asked through the interpreter. "Tomorrow you'll shoot for the lieutenant colonel. He expects you to fail. If you do, the program ends." The women conferred in Pashto, rapid, intense conversation. Then Zara spoke. "We will not fail." But the next morning on the range, Kit felt doubt creeping in. The women had only been training for 2 weeks. Basic marksmanship. They'd shown improvement, but they weren't ready for a demonstration that would determine the program's future. The lieutenant colonel arrived with a small entourage, 6 other officers, a dozen Marines. Everyone wanted to see if the old woman could actually teach Afghan women to shoot. The targets were set at 300 yards, not extreme range, but enough to test fundamental skills. Wind reading, trigger control, breathing. The first woman shot, acceptable grouping, 6 inches. The second, similar results. The third, fourth, fifth, all competent. Not impressive, but solid for 2 weeks of training. Then Zara stepped up. The lieutenant colonel watched with barely concealed skepticism. "This is your best student." "She's determined," Kit said. "Determination doesn't hit targets." Zara settled into position. Kit had worked with her every day, refining her form, teaching her to read wind, to control her breathing. The girl had natural talent. But talent under pressure was different than talent in training. Zara fired 5 shots. At 300 yards, the grouping was 4 inches, better than some of the Marines in the observing group. The lieutenant colonel grunted. "Not bad, but 300 yards isn't combat distance. Can she shoot farther?" This was the moment. Kit could play it safe. Say the women weren't ready for longer ranges. End the demonstration with modest success. Or she could take a risk. "Sir, I'd like to attempt something," Kit said. "What, 2,400 yards? Extreme long range. I'll take the shot to demonstrate it's possible. Then Zara will shoot at 1,200 yards to show she can apply the principles I've taught her." The lieutenant colonel laughed. "Master Guns, you're 62 years old. When's the last time you shot 2,400 yards? 20 years ago. And you think you can do it now?" In these conditions, the wind was gusting 20 to 30 miles per hour. Temperature was 115 degrees. The mirage made everything shimmer. "I think impossible is just a word we use for things we haven't done yet." The challenge spread through the base like wildfire. By the time Kit walked to the firing point, over 100 Marines had gathered. Everyone wanted to see the old woman fail, or succeed. Either way, it was a story worth watching. The rifle was an M40A5. Familiar weight, familiar feel. But Kit's hands trembled as she picked it up. Not from nerves, from the arthritis that was slowly stealing her future. She settled into position. The hard ground felt like concrete against her aging bones. Her knees screamed, her back protested. But once she was set, the tremor in her hands began to fade. "Spotter," she said. Gunnery Sergeant Kane had flown in from 29 Palms specifically for this demonstration. He'd heard about the challenge and refused to miss it. Now he settled next to Kit with a spotting scope. "Range 2,410 yards, he said. "Wind variable 15 to 30 southwest, gusting west. Temperature 115. "This is crazy, Master Guns." "Probably," Kit agreed. She began her calculations. Not with a computer, not with a ballistic calculator, with the knowledge earned over 40 years behind a scope. Elevation approximately 78 minutes of angle. When she studied the mirage, the dust, the flags at different distances. 3 distinct layers. Near wind at 20, mid-range at 25, far wind at 30. All from slightly different directions. The math was complex. The variables were enormous. And she had to account for Coriolis. At 2,400 yards, the Earth's rotation would push the bullet approximately 14 inches right. She made her adjustments. Click, click, click. Each adjustment felt like a small prayer. Her breathing slowed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, heart rate dropping. The world narrowed to the target, the wind, the rifle. The squeeze was perfect. Muscle memory from 10,000 training shots. The rifle fired. At 2,400 yards, the bullet's flight time was almost 5 seconds. 5 seconds where everyone watching held their breath. 5 seconds where Kit felt time stop. "Impact," Kane said, his voice filled with something between shock and awe. 7 inches from center. At 2,400 yards in these conditions, that's... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. The Marines watching erupted, cheering, disbelief, arguments about whether they'd actually seen what they thought they'd seen. But Kit wasn't done. She worked the bolt, chambered another round. "One shot could be luck," she said. The second shot took 6 seconds to prepare. Same calculations, same wind reading, same perfect trigger squeeze. Impact. 9 inches from center, opposite side. Third shot. Impact, 6 inches from center. 3 shots. Total group size, 16 inches at 2,400 yards. In combat conditions, with equipment that wasn't designed for that range, by a 62-year-old woman with arthritis. The lieutenant colonel stood silent. No smirk now, no skepticism. Kit rose slowly. Kane helped her to her feet. "Your turn," she said to Zara. The young Afghan woman looked terrified. "I cannot do what you did." "You don't need to. You just need to show them you learned what I taught you. 1,200 yards, that's all." Zara settled into position. Kit coached her through every step. Wind reading at 3 layers, elevation calculation, Coriolis compensation, breathing, trigger control. The shot felt like it took forever. "Impact," Kane said. 11 inches from center, at 1,200 yards first attempt, that's qualified marksman level. The Afghan women erupted in celebration. The Marines watching joined in. Even the skeptical officers applauded. The lieutenant colonel approached Kit. "I was wrong about all of it, but the program continues, whatever resources you need." Kit nodded, but she was looking at Zara, at the pride in the young woman's face, the transformation from victim to warrior. That mattered more than proving anyone wrong. Back at 29 Palms in the classroom, Kit finished the story. "Lesson 5, she said. Impossible is just unfamiliar. Break it into steps. Apply fundamentals. Trust your training. And remember that the people watching you fail want to see it happen. The best revenge is competence." One of the male students raised his hand. "Master Guns, oh, what happened? What happened to Zara?" Kit's expression darkened. "She was killed in 2012. Taliban ambush. But she took 3 of them with her before she went down. And the women she trained are still fighting, still protecting their communities. That's her legacy." The classroom was silent. "Which brings me to lesson 6, Kit said. The last one. The one that took me the longest to learn. Quantico, 2018. Kit was 70 years old and teaching her final class before retirement. The Advanced Scout Sniper course at Quantico was the pinnacle of Marine sniper training. Students who made it here were already expert marksmen. They were coming to learn the techniques that separated good from great. The class had 32 students. 5 were women. One of those women, First Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, was struggling. Hayes had the physical skills. Good shooter, good fitness, good tactical mind. But she couldn't handle the mental pressure. Every time she took a test shot, she second-guessed herself. Hesitated, missed. Kit saw it immediately. Recognized it. She'd been the same way early in her career. The voice in your head that said you weren't good enough, that you didn't belong, that your next failure would prove everyone right about you. 3 weeks into the 8-week course, Hayes was failing. The other instructors had written her off. "She doesn't have it," they said. "She'll wash out." Kit disagreed. On a Friday evening after the other instructors had left, Kit found Hayes alone on the range. The lieutenant was shooting, trying to force herself to improve through repetition. But you can't fix a mental problem with physical practice. "Lieutenant, you're done for the day," Kit said. Hayes looked up, eyes red. "Master Guns, I need to practice. I'm failing." "You're not failing because you can't shoot. You're failing because you don't believe you can." "I've tried. I've worked harder than anyone else here." "I know, I've watched. But hard work without confidence is just exhausting yourself." Kit sat on an equipment crate, gestured for Hayes to join her. "Let me tell you a story," Kit said. "When I was 25, I was the only woman in my sniper platoon. Every day someone told me I didn't belong, that I was too weak, too emotional, too female. And you know what? I believed them. I worked twice as hard to prove I belonged, and I was miserable." Hayes listened. "Then I met a gunnery sergeant who'd been shot 3 times and kept fighting. You know what he told me? He said the enemy doesn't care about your doubts. The mission doesn't care about your insecurities. The only person who cares about whether you think you belong is you. So stop asking permission to be good at this. Just be good at it." "How?" Hayes asked. "By trusting that you've already done the work. You've trained, you've practiced, you know the fundamentals. The only thing standing between you and success is you. Get out of your own way." They spent the next 12 hours on that range, not shooting, talking. Kit shared every doubt she'd ever had, every failure, every moment she'd wanted to quit, and she shared how she'd pushed through. By dawn, Hayes looked different, lighter, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying. The next week, Hayes qualified on every test. The week after, she was top of the class. At graduation, Hayes sought out Kit. "Master Guns, I need to thank you. You saved my career." I didn't save anything, Kit said. You did the work. I just helped you see that you'd already done it. It was more than that. You showed me that struggling doesn't mean failing, that asking for help is strength, not weakness. Hayes deployed to Syria 6 months later, and the techniques Kit taught her, the mental resilience, as much as the physical skills, saved lives. 18 Marines and coalition soldiers survived engagements because Hayes made shots under pressure that she wouldn't have made without that Friday night conversation. Hayes wrote Kit a letter. Kit still had it, kept it in her desk at home. You didn't give up on me when everyone else did, the letter said. Because of that, I didn't give up on myself, and because I didn't give up, 18 people are alive today. That's your legacy, Master Guns. Not your kills, not your records, the people you taught who then saved others. That ripples forward forever. Kit finished reading the letter aloud to her class at 29 Palms. Her voice broke on the last sentence. She didn't apologize for the tears. Lesson 6, she said. This profession isn't about you. It's about everyone who comes after you. Every student you train, every technique you share, every moment you choose to help someone instead of judging them. That's how you matter. That's how your service continues even after you're gone. The students sat in silence. Some were crying. Even Kane had to wipe his eyes. Jennifer Hayes is now a captain, Kit continued. She's training the next generation of snipers, teaching them the same lessons I taught her. And they'll teach others. That's legacy. That's what we're building here. Not just skilled shooters, a tradition of excellence and mentorship that outlives all of us. After class, Kit walked to Bennett's office. Major, I have a request. Name it. I want to do a final demonstration. Extreme range. Harder than anything I've taught them. I want them to see what's possible when you apply all 6 lessons together. Bennett studied her. Master Guns, you don't have anything to prove. This isn't about proving, it's about inspiring. These students have learned the techniques. Now they need to see what those techniques can accomplish when pushed to the absolute limit. What range are you thinking? 2,800 yards. Bennett whistled. That's beyond the effective range of the M40A5. The conditions would have to be perfect. Then we wait for perfect conditions, and when they come, I take the shot. Wow, Kit met his eyes. Because in 6 months, maybe less, my hands won't steady anymore. This is my last chance to show them what a lifetime of mastery looks like. After I'm gone, they'll remember. And maybe when they face their own impossible shots, they'll remember that a 76-year-old woman with arthritis made a shot that shouldn't have been possible. And they'll try anyway. Bennett nodded slowly. We'll set it up. The word spread. Master Guns Bridger was going to attempt a demonstration shot at 2,800 yards. The entire Scout Sniper School wanted to witness it. The date was set for the following Friday, assuming weather conditions cooperated. Thursday night, Kit's phone rang. Marcus, her oldest son. Mom, we heard you're doing some kind of demonstration tomorrow. Are you sure that's safe? You're 76. I'm fine, Marcus. Dad would want you to be careful. Your father would want me to do what I'm good at while I still can. How long do you have before the arthritis? Kit looked at her trembling hands. Not long. That's why I'm doing this now. I wish you'd come home. Rest. Enjoy retirement. I am enjoying it. This work, these students, this is what makes me happy. Marcus sighed. I know, I just worry. I know you do, and I love you for it. But let me finish this. Let me go out doing what I was meant to do. Friday morning arrived with perfect conditions. Clear sky, temperature 70 degrees, wind steady at 12 miles per hour from the southwest, as good as it would get in the Mojave Desert. The entire Scout Sniper School assembled. Over 200 Marines, instructors from other programs came to watch. Word had reached the base commander, who showed up personally. Kit walked to the firing point. 2,800 yards away, the target waited. At that distance, you could barely see it with the naked eye. Even through a scope, it looked impossibly small. Kane was her spotter. The 12 students from her class surrounded the firing position. Everyone else stood back, giving her space. Kit picked up the M40A5. Her hands trembled. She took a deep breath. The tremor lessened, but didn't stop completely. Master Guns, Kane said quietly, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. She settled into position. The familiar ache in her knees, the protest in her back, but also the familiar comfort of the rifle. The weight, the balance. Coming home one last time. Her breathing slowed. The tremor in her hands faded as focus took over. Wind, she asked. 12 steady southwest. Mirage shows 13 at mid-range. Target flag shows 11 west-southwest. 3 layers. Kit began her calculations. Elevation at 2,800 yards, approximately 98 minutes of angle. Wind drift across 3 layers, roughly 9 feet total, but not linear. The bullet would spend more time in the mid-range wind. Coriolis at this latitude and range 16 inches right. The math was complex, but she'd been doing it for 50 years. Click, click, click. The adjustments felt sacred. Each one a prayer to physics and wind and all the gods of ballistics. 200 Marines held their breath. Kit found the natural pause in her breathing. Her fingers settled on the trigger. The squeeze was perfect. 50 years of muscle memory made flesh. The shot broke. 5.2 seconds of flight time. Kit stayed on the scope watching. At 2,800 yards, you couldn't see the bullet. You could only wait. Impact, Kane said, his voice barely a whisper, 4 inches from center. The Marines erupted, cheering, shouting, disbelief. The base commander was on his feet applauding, but Kit wasn't done. She worked the bolt. One could be luck. Second shot, different wind reading. The conditions had shifted slightly. New calculations, new adjustments. Impact, 5 inches from center, opposite side. Third shot, impact, 3 inches from center. 3 shots, total group 12 inches at 2,800 yards. Kit cleared the weapon, stood slowly. Her legs barely cooperated. Kane and Bennett helped her up. The students crowded around. Questions, amazement, requests to explain every detail of the shots. But Kit raised her hand for silence. Everything you saw me do, she said, came from the 6 lessons. Reading layered winds from Panama. Trusting fundamentals over technology from Beirut. Learning from failure in the Gulf. Teaching to deepen understanding from Iraq. Believing impossible is just unfamiliar from Afghanistan. And remembering this isn't about me, it's about you from Quantico. She paused. You have all 6 lessons now. Not just the theory. You've seen them applied. You've practiced them. You've earned them. Now you pass them on. Teach the next generation. Add your own lessons to mine. Make this better. That's how we honor everyone who came before us. Corporal Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. Master Guns, will you keep teaching? We need you. Kit smiled. As long as I can hold a rifle, I'll teach. But the day is coming when I can't. When that day arrives, you step up. All of you. This knowledge doesn't die with me. It lives in you. 6 months passed like wind through Joshua trees. Kit taught 3 days a week until her hands made it impossible. The tremor grew worse. The medication stopped working. By April, she could no longer demonstrate shots. By May, she could barely hold a rifle. But she kept teaching, lecture-based now. Stories, theory, the mental aspects of long-range shooting. The students didn't care that she couldn't shoot anymore. They came to hear her speak, to learn from her experience. In June, she taught her final class. I want to tell you what happened after Afghanistan, she said. After I taught Zara, after that demonstration. The students leaned forward. I got a message 3 years later from a Marine patrol in Helmand province. They'd been pinned down by Taliban fighters. Sniper fire from a compound 800 yards away. They couldn't advance, couldn't retreat. They were going to die. Kit paused. Then someone started shooting from a different angle, suppressing the Taliban position. Accurate fire, professional. The Marines were able to maneuver and neutralize the threat. 11 Marines survived. When they secured the area, they found who'd helped them. An Afghan woman, one of Zara's students, using the techniques I'd taught Zara who'd taught her. That woman saved 11 lives using knowledge that traced back to me. But it wasn't my accomplishment. It was the chain of teachers and students, each one passing the torch forward. Mom, Kit looked at her class. You're part of that chain now. Where it goes from here depends on you. After class, Kane approached her. Ma'am, I have news. The Corps is adopting your 6-story teaching method as official curriculum. Every Scout Sniper instructor will be required to learn them. Kit felt tears forming. All of them. All of them. Your lessons, your stories, your legacy. It'll be taught to every Marine sniper from now on. That night, alone in her house in Yucca Valley, Kit received a package from her students, all 47 of them who'd gone through her final classes. Inside was a custom rifle scope, engraved on the side, Master Gunnery Sergeant Catherine Bridger, the wind reader who taught us to see. Below that, 47 signatures. Each student, each one a life she'd touched. Kit mounted the scope on her rifle, the one she'd carried for 30 years. She couldn't shoot it anymore, but she could hold it. Remember, her phone rang. Marcus, Mom, how are you feeling? Good, really good actually. Sarah and I are flying out next week, bringing the kids. We want to visit. I'd like that. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't understand before. Why you needed this work. I get it now. What changed? I talked to some of your students. They told me what you meant to them. I'm proud of you, Mom. Kit smiled through tears. Thank you, Marcus. That means everything. And 2 years later, Kit stood at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico. Not as an instructor, as an observer. Kane was now the chief instructor. He'd invited her to watch him teach the 6 lessons to a new class. Her lessons, her stories, but told in his voice with his own experiences added. The students didn't know Kit was there at first. She sat in the back, just another visitor. Kane told the story of Panama, of layered winds. Then he added his own story from Syria using the same principle. He told the story of Beirut, of technology failing. Then he added a story from his own deployment when his scope was damaged. One by one, the 6 lessons. But growing, evolving, new examples, new applications. The knowledge living and breathing and changing. After class, Kane introduced Kit to the students. This is Master Guns Bridger. The stories I just told you, they're hers. The methods you're learning, she developed them. Everything we do here traces back to her. The students stood at attention, rendered honors. Kit waved them at ease. Those stories belong to all of us now. Gunnery Sergeant Kane added to them. You'll add to them. That's how knowledge grows. Each generation makes it better. A young female corporal raised her hand. Master Guns, what do you want us to remember most? Kit thought for a long moment. Remember that you're not just learning to shoot. You're learning to serve, to teach, to pass something forward that's bigger than you. Every shot you take, someone taught you how. Every student you train, you're honoring that teacher. That's the chain. Don't break it. She paused. And remember that impossible is just a word. I was told women couldn't be snipers, couldn't teach, couldn't make shots at extreme range. I was told I was too old, too weak, too broken to matter. I proved them wrong not by arguing, but by doing. You'll face the same voices. Prove them wrong the same way. With competence, with excellence, with grace, the students applauded. That night, Kit returned to Yucca Valley, to her empty house, but it didn't feel empty anymore. She sat on the porch with her coffee, watched the desert sunrise, thought about Thomas gone 5 years now, thought about all the Marines she'd trained, all the lessons passed on, all the lives saved by knowledge she'd shared. Her hands trembled. The arthritis had won. She could barely hold the coffee cup. But it didn't matter. The shots she'd taken were done. The lessons she'd taught were in good hands. The legacy she'd built would outlive her by generations. Catherine Bridger, 78 years old, 127 confirmed kills, author of the Advanced Wind Reading Manual, architect of the 6-lesson teaching methods, smiled. The mission was complete. Not because the war was won, wars never really end, but because she'd passed the torch, and the light kept burning. Somewhere a Marine she'd trained was teaching a student. That student would save lives. Those lives would go on to matter in ways she'd never know. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was enough. The sun rose over the Mojave. Another beautiful day. Another gift. Kit raised her trembling coffee cup to the light. To all of you, she whispered. Everyone who taught me. Everyone I taught. Everyone they'll teach. Keep the chain unbroken. The wind moved through the Joshua trees, and somewhere very far away a young Marine took a shot that shouldn't have been possible. And made it. Because an old woman once taught them that impossible was just unfamiliar. And that knowledge, once given, never dies.